What is up, everybody? Chris Fluke here. This is the January 29th edition of the Weekly Word. Now, man, we just had some heated discussion in here locally. This is what we got going on this week. We got all kinds of stuff, obviously, like always. But first things first, in this area here, I heard about a little story about a high school. Long story short, there may have been some hazing going on at this high school. The sports coach, how responsible is that individual for what's going on in his locker room? Now, you talk about the NCAA, they have things like lack of institutional control, where it's like a coach, Penn State might have got in trouble with that, with Joe Paterno. Did he really know what was going on behind closed doors? Is he losing control of the room? Should he be responsible for what happens with his coaching staff and with his players? My opinion on the matter, absolutely. You cannot let, high school kids you can't let them police themselves because they're still not adults. They still don't know what's going on. So you have a locker room, kids are acting up, say there is some hazing going on. If you're the head coach, you need to know about this stuff. You need to figure it out. You need to talk to the kids on the team. You need to connect with these kids. You need to figure out who's these leaders, who are these kids in the locker room that might stop this stuff. They're going to be the ones that are going to have to come to you and tell you, hey, there's some stuff going on. And then you, as the coach, you go in there and try to self-correct that, or not self-correct. You just go in there and correct that. To have stuff go on, say you have a coach's room right here, closing the door, and then on the outside of that door, there's a bunch of high school males in that room. It's really not acceptable for you as the coach not to take responsibility for what goes on. If you take responsibility for every win, for every loss that goes on the field, you should also take responsibility for what is going on in that locker room, because at the end of the day, you are the man in charge. You are the supervisor. Some people, some school employees were in here telling me, like, I can't even go into a bathroom if there's students in there. What are coaches doing in the locker room? They're not in the locker room, but they're in charge of the locker room. It still falls underneath them. Or they put people in place. They put kids, they put athletes in place to police that locker room. So you have like some sort of internal police situation going on, and if things like hazing and bigger picture things go on, whether it's a racial incident, whether it's a kid getting beat up, a kid getting picked on, a kid getting bullied, a kid, just different stuff going on, weird stuff that goes on in these locker rooms sometimes. That falls under you. You're the head coach. You're the person at the top. And if the administration doesn't, so anyway, the head coach is here. Who's above the head coach? The administration. So if it works its way all the way up to that chain, then that might be an issue. So at this level, you got the kids. Then at this level, you've got the leaders on the team. After that, you have the coaches. Then you have maybe administration. The higher it gets up the chain, the bigger the activity becomes, the bigger the event becomes. It might blow up in your face if you don't self-correct and take control of the locker room. Now, another thing, man, always going on in this area. It's always the debate in Pennsylvania. Do you want to have your public schools compete against your private schools? There's some people out there saying public schools don't stand a chance to a certain extent, Let's say it's football and you get into the playoffs, you might be able to beat those first couple teams, but eventually you run into one of these private powerhouse schools, in Philly or from Pittsburgh, something like that. With wrestling, it's been going on. It's just been going on. Some of these schools have the ability to stack their team. Now, one thing you could do at these public schools is to try to create some sort of winning culture, in the sense that, like, you don't want to just give the excuse to your kids, well, they could recruit. They're a private school. They're going to beat us. So be it. All that does is just trickle down to the kids. So if you're like an adult, if you're a parent, if you're a coach, I'd be very careful, very, very mindful on how you word this stuff, because your kids are going to hear that. Then your kids are going to forever use that as an excuse as they get older. And then they're going to start finding excuses for other things that don't go their way. Start blaming it on external circumstances. There's only so much, you could control. You could control just what you do, how you're going to react, and how you're going to respond to things. So, to create excuses and call them reasons for things not working out for you, I think is a big-time mistake, and we don't want to instill that in our kids' brains. In addition to that, another great piece of information, another good conversation coming up with a parent, they had kids involved with basketball, lacrosse, baseball. And now they're in college or they're all out of college, and it just got to the point where, now the parents are like, you know what, me and my husband, that's our biggest regret, is all the money and all the time we spent on all of these things here. And, they got college attention, and They could have gone, all three of them could have gone on to play college sports. Two of the three were just like, yeah, I'm done with it. It was a little bit too much. Maybe they overplayed it a little bit. Maybe they got burned out. But at the end of it, too, it's like, does any of this stuff really matter? Does getting on this AAU basketball team, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter? These are the questions that you got to answer as a parent. What are we taking away from? Are we taking money out of our bank account? Are we taking time away from vacations? Are we taking time away from our other children? Are we taking time away from our family and our friends? That's how you got to kind of figure this stuff out when you go ahead and make these decisions. I'm not a parent of an older kid. I've got a little girl that's not even 2 yet. I'm not speaking from experience. I'm speaking from who I communicate with, other parents that have kind of lived through it, other things that I've read. So obviously you guys can do what you want, right? That's what living in America is all about. But I would just be very mindful when you go ahead and make these decisions. What are you taking away from? Who is this thing affecting? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it because of the social aspect? Or are you doing it because it's going to be for the betterment of your child? All right? Moving on. Keystone habits, right? So when we talk about that culture change I was talking about earlier, the way you word things, that could kind of trickle into the mindset of how you go ahead and live the rest of your life. These keystone habits, these small little changes that you can make in your day-to-day life, they will unintentionally carry over into other aspects. We're talking about food journals. We're talking about exercise. We're talking about meditating, things of that nature. The British Journal of Health and Psychology said they did some research, and they were like, college students, the stress level's down, alcohol consumption's down, caffeine consumption down, their healthy eating is on the rise, their sleep is better, they feel more relaxed. All of this because they just decided we're going to exercise. So if you can introduce a positive thing like exercise into your routine, it's going to have a positive effects in all these other areas. The food journal is going to affect you in other areas as well. All of this stuff. So some of these small little changes have the power to compound and really blow up. That was one important thing that I think I needed a reminder of this week. Kind of just what I've been doing and how I've been attacking my day-to-day routine. So I think it's important to kind of get that out there. And we need these reminders every 2 to 3 to 4 months. So that's one side of it. Now, if you've been following my stuff, I got into this book, Gifted Children by Ellen Winter. I believe that's her name anyway. I talked about it previously with Frank on the podcast. They talked about gender. They talked about SAT scores for 13 and 14-year-olds. Verbal skills identical between boys and girls, but there was a pretty considerable difference in mathematics and the scores that they were getting on the math exam. So, if you scored 500 and above, the score's 2-1. Boy to girl. Sorry about that yawn. 600 and above. Sorry, the 600 to 700 range, 4-1, boy to girl. 700 and above, it freaking blows up and becomes 13-1. Is there a cultural change? Is there an issue going on? Are we not teaching this stuff to our little girls? Are we not placing an emphasis on it? Is it not cool to learn math if you're a 8, 9, 10-year-old girl? One thing I will say, there's a lot of females that do come in here, young-ish, in that 10, 14 range, 15 range. When I ask them, hey, what's your favorite subject? A lot of them are they enjoy math. And I was like, all right, good. Maybe they're going to be that first generation that's kind of fighting these statistics a little bit. Now, just yesterday morning, early in the morning, I was reading about the ideal environment that you want to create for your child. You want to stimulate them, but you also want to nurture them as well, right? That's kind of what they found in the research. To have an authoritative, approach to it where you set some standards, you have these high moral standards, but you also respect their independence and their potential for errors. You're not an authoritarian. You're not rigid and like a dictator, where you're overseeing everything and not letting them explore and do things on their own, being super disciplined, super rigid with your stuff. If they make a mistake, it's like, life is over and you drop the hammer on them. You want to be able to nurture them. But on the flip side of that, they found that with athletes, they need to be stimulated but not nurtured. And I'm like, well, that just kind of speaks, I guess, to the nature of athletics and how cutthroat it could be where, as a kid, if your goal, as a parent, do you want your kid to be nurtured or not nurtured? All right. People think, oh, they're being babied, this and that. Having a conversation yesterday with a woman, with a mom, and she's like, don't you just want to yell sometimes at these kids and grab them, whatever? And I'm like, no, I don't. She's like, well, don't you have to? And I'm like, I don't think you do. And if you do have to raise your voice, because 99 out of 100 times if you don't raise your voice, and if you do raise your voice, they're going to take that a little bit more serious. If you show them respect, and if you kind of like show that you care about them as a person, they're probably going to do what you want them to do most of the time. And those times that they don't, and you have to kind of speak up and speak a little louder, they're going to respect that. They're going to respect you because they respect you, and they're going to probably listen, where it's like, I might only have to yell one time and that's it, guys. Yo, let's get on task here, all right? You can have fun, but don't cross that line. So when you're creating this stuff here, it was just a little bit eye-opening to see that the parents, that the people that were athletic high achievers as kids, they did not grow up in a nurturing environment. And I'm like, that probably plays a role in their athletic success. Just the way that they are, emotionally and mentally, because they weren't nurtured in an ideal setting. So that's something to think about a little bit if you're a parent. Do you want to create a nice, healthy human being for the long haul, or do you want them to be the best 13-year-old lacrosse player on the planet, or softball player or football player? If that's the case, then don't have a soft side with your kids and just be a dictator. I'm not advising that at all. Moving on, saw a crazy movie. 1917. Just to sum this thing up, if you want to see the harsh realities of war, especially for that First World War, 1917 obviously was the year it took place. What they asked this man to do, cross enemy lines, run basically in a dead sprint by yourself or with somebody else, grab a partner, go do this thing, tell this group is about to get massacred. They are being set up by the Germans, and so they didn't get the communication intercepted. They had to do it on foot. Totally crazy. Harsh realities of war. Emotionally, if you're a little bit fragile going into this, I probably wouldn't advise it because it gets you in the heart. There's stories, there's like a little brotherhood going on between two guys that aren't brothers. There's actual brotherhood going on as one man that's on the mission has to go warn his brother that they are about to get slaughtered. There's family at home. There's that whole dynamic of like, hey, I don't even want to experience going home because I'm never going to want to come back. I don't want to even think about that thought of being at home because it's going to affect what I'm doing today. Plus, maybe you're not even thinking that you are going to make it out of it. These guys were fighting for days, hours, night after night, just to kind of occupy this much space of land, just so they can move that much forward. The trenches, the rats, all this nastiness that all went on to warfare, that trench warfare stuff that was in that First World War, harrowing, crazy. Great movie, suspenseful, had me on the edge of my seat. I loved it. I would go see it again. I would recommend everybody see it, but it is harsh and it is a little bit dark because of the reality of the situation. Now, moving to something a little lighter. Gym happenings. What do we got going on at the gym? The girls program. Had a dad come in yesterday. He's like, honestly, my daughter was here about 5 times. I'm noticing a difference on the court, just in her ability to even shoot threes. She's a tall, thin, maybe 7th grade girl, 6th or 7th grade girl. Might not have the oomph to get the ball to the rim on the 3-pointers. Few workouts. She's feeling confident. She's getting more on her shot. She's hitting it stuff. And I'm like, what do you think? This is confidence? He's like, he thought initially it was a strength thing. And I'm like, she's only been here 5 or 6 times. I don't know if it's a strength thing, but anyway, it's awesome. That's the kind of feedback we're getting. Parents saying, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing for these young girls. You got some middle school girls flexing, showing off their muscles, checking themselves out, feeling good about themselves. Trying to build a stronger, female character, kind of empowering these girls to feel good about themselves and to be stronger is super important, especially now more than ever with what we talked about last week on this on the Weekly Word with social media and stuff. It's hard out there, especially as you're growing up. You see what everybody else is doing, you start comparing yourself to them, when really all I want to do is kind of help create some confidence, boys and girls alike. It's not just about that, but I'm just speaking specifically about the girls program I have going on. It's great to see them build confidence and start to feel a little bit better about themselves and see themselves lifting some weights and like, dang, this is cool. Pushing sleds with, 225 pounds on it. And it's like, dang, feeling good. Going home and telling their mom about it because then the mom's coming in the next day telling me about it. So that's pretty awesome. And I'm really enjoying that part of it. So now it's time. It's time to wrap this thing up. And I got a quote, and I don't even remember the quote per se. I think it's called the Bob Principle, right? I think it was a John Maxwell book. Well, basically it's like, if Bob has a problem with everybody, maybe, and Bob is complaining about everybody, maybe everybody's not the problem. Maybe Bob's a problem. Sometimes you're going to have to take a look in the mirror. And if you think you're being done wrong by everybody, maybe it's not them. Maybe it's not everybody that's actually wrong. Maybe it's yourself. The Bob principle. Sorry to all the Bobs out there for using your name for this example. I think I stole it from John C. Maxwell. Hope you guys got a great day. Peace, everybody.